back to the Influencers Journey Show. Today's topic is how to make feedback the catalyst for change. It's such a great title. How do you make feedback the catalyst for change to ignite your business and make your best better? And if you just joining us now, I am sitting down and I'm interviewing my co-host, Ms. Cheri Elder, and we're talking about her journey to excellence, if you will. And excellence is a continual process in our mind. And man, we're not talking about perfection. We're talking about excellence. And we use those words intentionally. So I have some questions I want to ask Cheri, because one of the things I love about working with Cheri is she's coachable. And I want to define coachable so that everybody gets what I'm talking about. Coachable is when you're able to receive feedback and do what that feedback says, act on it. And I want to clarify, because oftentimes when I ask people if they're coachable, they'll say yes. And I'll go, let me define it for you. And I'll say coachable means do what I tell you to do. Not whether you like it, whether it makes sense. It's just taking the feedback and taking action on it. Because what most people do is they go, ooh, I don't like that feedback, so I'm not going to do that. That is not coachable. And then others will be like, oh, I'll do that because that sounds good. I like that. Or people go, I don't understand that, so I'm not doing it. One of the things I learned on my journey was my best mentors often gave me feedback that I didn't like, one, or I didn't understand. And my commitment was, if I was going to trust them to mentor me, I had to trust them to look into my blind spots and help me move forward. It is an ask. So that is the ask that we're going to talk about, and how do you keep yourself in that coachable space? So, Cheri, when you hit a wall in your business and your skills weren't enough, what was that like for you? And how did you know that that was the thing that was happening?
Yeah. So it's very interesting, because now I'm able to recognize it when I hear it in others. So the biggest thing for me, I started to feel like people didn't see my value in the marketplace. And when I talk about people not being able to see my value in the marketplace, it's that thing where people, are like, yeah, that's great. I hear everything that you say, but they don't enroll, or they don't step over on the other side to actually work with you. And I know some of our super achievers have probably experienced this. This is, when I talk about people will shop you. So people will come to you and, they're always the people who want to pick your brain. Right. And they ask you all of these questions, and you really think that you're doing such a service by answering all the questions and allowing people to pick your brain, but they never really, come over to the other side. And yes, there's frustration that goes along with that. But at some point, I was required to really stop and take a look at it and start to ask myself the question, why is that happening? Why do people see me as that, person, and, discount the value, or don't see the true value or understand my value in the marketplace? And one of the things that it brought to me was I was always in the how of my business. And as I stayed in my how, and I didn't get this at first, but staying in the how conversation of the business, there was no real distinction of why someone would choose to work with me over someone who did something similar. They're shopping. So yeah, so they'll shop and they'll compare, right? Because I stayed so much in the technicalities, of it. Oh, okay, I get that. Let me see where I can go and find that, at a less expensive price and all that stuff. And it wasn't until I got present working with my mindset mastery mentor. Thank you, Suzan Hart. I realized the piece that was missing for me was the relatedness, that people really
Mhm.
didn't know who Cheri was. So how would I find my me only clients, those people who I could say, you know what, I understand exactly what you've been through because I've, been there. Like I like to say, I get it, and because I get it, I got you, and it was learning, how to move into being more relatable
Yeah.
in the marketplace and relatable to my clients.
You said something really key, and I want to just take a moment and dive into this, because you said that people didn't see your value,
Mm-hmm.
and you stayed in the how. And oftentimes we think the how is our value.
Right.
And one of the things I learned really early on is everybody has the how. Like we go to school, we get an education, we learn a trade, we learn a skill, and the hows are relatively the same. And some people are better at the how, and
Yes.
others, are average. But in general, the how is all the same. And I remember sitting down with one of my friends, Mr. Scott Duncan, and he's a basketball coach, high level. And
Mm-hmm.
I asked him what was the distinction between players that were really good and players who never just cut it and never went on to the NBA. And he said it was their character. And that always stuck with me. He said it
Right.
was their character, and they had such great development of their character, get this, that they knew their value.
Yeah.
And so part of what it is, as most influencers, what distinguishes an influencer in the marketplace is they know who they be, and they understand their value. Now, understanding your value doesn't come easy because it's the work.
Right.
It's the work that allows us to put our unique self, our special self, into the marketplace. It's I know who I am, and I'm comfortable in my skin, and I know inside my skin I bring some unique things to the table. One
Yeah.
is my experience, one is my unique walk, one is all these things. We're not taught that.
Yeah, and I was just about to say, and that is so great because it's one thing to feel it, and I think I've always like felt it, but to communicate it. And
Yeah.
I remember when the shifts in the conversations started to happen, for me, and I like to always put it this way, when I got the courage, to show up, that way. And it does. And when I say show up that way, it didn't mean that I, all of a sudden, became rude or disrespectful or any other things. I'm on social media and I see it all the time when people have these types of epiphanies in their business. They almost go onto the rant and then they're blasting clients and they're doing all sorts of stuff. On social media. Is really interesting, but that wasn't my thing. I think for me, I got really, really clear. And that's how the conversation about serve, share, shine started to come out. I got really clear in who I'm called to serve, and then also how I'm called to serve. And I found that the more that I started to communicate that into the marketplace, like things shifted for me. I started to, like what we say now, I started to draw my divine clients, to me, because I myself define that and what it looked like for me, and I had the courage to go ahead and communicate it. So I think that that's the biggest thing.
And with that becomes a different mindset, because when people don't take the time to define their divine client, that group that they're called to serve, they're actually most often sitting in a scarcity mentality.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the belief that I work with everybody because I just need
Right.
clients, right? And when I started in network marketing, they'd say, if you have a credit card and a pulse, you're in my team. And then you get the people who have a credit card and a pulse and they do nothing because
And
that's
they
all
drive
they
me
have.
crazy.
They don't have the character of a leader.
Yeah.
And so one of the things is when we take the time to do the work, to
Yeah.
figure out who am I truly called to serve, What is their journey? What do they look like? What do they say? All those things, it becomes narrow. And now we are required to sit in this abundance mindset. In that, yes, I'm narrowing the playing field, but there's enough of those people. One,
Yeah.
I can find them. But this is, I think, the other thing is that when we sit in that place, it's almost a conversation that there's a unique group of people that I am called to serve.
Yeah.
They know me by name. I know them by name. And when I speak, they hear me.
Yes.
And to get to that place is my work and your work.
Yeah.
And you know, we talk a lot about on the influencer's journey. Influencers earn the right. They do the work. They do their personal growth. They uncover things about themselves. And then they put those vulnerable uncoverings into the marketplace, and their clients find them. So it's a really cool journey. So what it brings me to next is one of the questions I asked you, and I asked this to most of my clients, and I know this was a question that was a game changer for you.
Yeah.
Who are you required to become, Cheria, to get to your next level? And I remember you looked at me and you repeated the question, and you walked off a little bewildered. What is this woman talking about? Who am I required to become? How did that impact you?
Well, I have to say, at first I thought it was a very interesting question. I don't think I've ever heard the question posed before. Who am I required to become? And so I was like, oh, that's great. But I have no idea. I have no clue. So it's one of those things where you kind of tuck it away in your back pocket, and you said, you know what I said, I'm going to circle back, to this a little bit later. And many of our super achievers have probably heard me share the story about going on the freedom retreat and getting stuck in a zip line. And I was just like, oh, that was a real defining moment for me in taking a look at how I actually walked through the world up until that point. So how am I when I'm faced with the tough times, the challenges, things that I don't know, when I'm scared out of my pants, I don't know what to do? How do I interact with others? Am I the person who can easily, be vulnerable and and ask for help? And unfortunately, at that moment, the answer to the question was no. And so that was my first insight into the question, who am I required to become? And it's become a question that I find myself asking myself oftentimes, almost 2 to 3 times a week, whenever I'm bumping up against the wall of something. Who am I required to become to step into the next level of whatever it is I'm trying to grow into? So it's like my go-to question. So the first thing that I learned is that I'm required to be vulnerable. And when I take a look at vulnerability, and since then, we've been doing a lot of studying and work uncovering the true meaning of vulnerability, because for me, vulnerability wasn't something that I was taught as a kid growing up. It's always, you go somewhere, you figure it out. And then once you figure it out, then you're able to come back, or you never let them see you cry, and you never let them see you sweat. And I didn't realize or know up until that point the impact of those things on my life and on my business. So the work on vulnerability and being vulnerable has been such interesting work, and the reason why I'm using the word interesting, I'm not going to say that it's easy, because it's not easy. It's very interesting because I get the opportunity to see those pieces of myself that oftentimes I don't want to take a look at.
Absolutely.
And so that's the interesting part about doing the vulnerability work. And I think the second piece of it that we unpack for business, and this is the challenge that you also pose to me: who are you required to become? And we're stepping, past the stage of just being the marketer, but becoming an influencer in the marketplace. So as we unpack this thing called influence, who are we, or who am I required to become to be seen an influencer in the marketplace? And that also has a beautiful set of challenges as well. So am I, going to be that person who could take the tough conversations, who could take the opposing side, who's willing to go against the grain sometimes of the things that we see in the marketplace, and say, oh no, not really. I don't think that. Or even if I think that is true, does it really apply in this scenario, or does it apply to a client who's at a certain stage in their business? And it's being able to have the courage to say, not so fast, hold up, let's take a look at this a different way, or let's do this or approach this, or there's some things that you might not like to hear that needs to happen, but I've been there. And so now let me go ahead and share with you, so your journey doesn't have to be as hard or as challenging as my journey. So that's the second thing. And then I think that the third thing, when I ask myself that question, who am I required to become? It's, how am I leading myself through the world?
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful thing, isn't it, though, Suzan? When sometimes when we find ourselves wanting to point the finger and tell people, this is what you got to do, this is what you got to do, this is what you should do. But life humbles you. And it makes you sit down and say, oh no, it's not really about them. This is what you need to do. And you need to, you meaning me, I need to implement, all of these things and show up as that person, and then let my action be the inspiration for others, to do those things. So yeah, it's very, very interesting question. Definitely, since you posed the question 2 years ago, it has been my go-to question.
For me, it was a humbling question, because one is it stopped me from looking outside of myself and really holding the mirror and saying, who are you required to become? I think the other thing, and you said it so beautifully, was that it really had me understand that leadership is being the example.
Yeah.
And the telling and selling, in terms of telling people what to do and trying to sell an idea, only goes so far. Influence, and for everyone who's listening and you're on the influencer's journey, influence happens through action. Yeah. Influence happens when we model what we believe and what we say. And it's when those things align that you have impact in the world. And so it's really always a searching of asking yourself, am I in alignment?
Right.
Who am I required to become to be in alignment? What I say, what I think, what I do is all in alignment. So when I show up, I appear congruent and therefore impactful. The other thing that's really cool, and I want you to just speak to this for a moment, is, one of the things that we realize is, who am I required to become? It's all these subsections. And, so we've talked about who you required to become with your money, who you're required to become in your leadership, who you're required to become in your self-mastery, who you're required to become for your clients. And so when we're talking influence, it is the totality of character and being intentional and accountable for it. And why it's so important to have a mentor and a coach is because we have blind spots. We can't see it, right? And it's having someone who's willing to point to the blind spot and say, honey, look over here and tell me what you see. And a lot of times you go, nah, I don't want to tell you what I see. I don't like that.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, so let me tell you what I see. You tell me what I know you see, right?
Yeah, and I love it because that's exactly what it is. And so I think we all know to a certain extent what those things are, but
Mhm.
it's how we choose to hold them. So do you hold them in such a way where, you stick your, you do the ostrich move, you stick your head in the sand and it's like, oh, I don't want to, address this, or you build a story. And that's another thing that doing this work has done for me. It has me going back and taking a look at all of the stories that, I tell myself it. And it's one of those things that even in our work together just recently, so I'm going to let our super achievers peer, behind the curtain a little bit. So we're working, on processes in the business and growing the team. That's the focus area, and bumping up against some walls and some challenges. And I realized that there was a story that I've been telling myself for years,
Mhm.
really going back to my days of working on a 9 to 5. Now, I've been out of 9 to 5 now for probably how long? 12, 13 years. But this story was still running me. And what I love about what you did, you just asked a simple question that kind of just like shifted. Like, oh, well, how do you expect to know this? You've never done this before. This is a new learn
Yeah.
for you, And it was so amazing because I think that that's what we do a lot of times. Like, we know that there are things that we need to look at, but we just keep our stories just running. And so being able to just let go of the story
Yeah.
that you're telling yourself and then allow a new story to be written around that thing. And you are the author. You have the ability to make that story whatever you want that story to be. So why not write one that has the best outcome? And so that was my biggest learn recently around that.
Mhm. It's interesting because one of the things you're talking about is our ability to rewrite the endings of stories.
Mhm. Right.
And the part of the work we do when we talk about inviting people to magnetize and monetize, it's really claiming the power
Right.
to rewrite an ending of a story in such a way that it inspires you and it inspires the people you were called to serve. And so, how many stories as we do our own personal work are we required to rewrite so that we can become the person who holds the position that we've called ourselves into, whether that be, the leader of a team, the leader of your business. Who am I required to become? The last question I have for you, Cheria, is that you are someone who I will say you're probably one of the most coachable people I've had the privilege of working with. What has you remained so coachable? Because I have given you some tough feedback. Like, so I have to I'm known to give people feedback and make them cry. I do it with love. However, I have given that feedback, and some people will avoid, and
Mhm.
you have leaned in every time.
Yeah.
Why is that?
I think for me, it's so simple. It's because I know where I desire to be.
Mm,
And it doesn't get any simpler than that for me. And that's all part of it. So do you allow yourself to be stuck in your ways or stuck in your mindset, stuck in the comfortableness of where you are versus accepting the challenge of
ah,
what is required for me to grow into the person that I need to be to hold the vision that I have. And and I think that that's what it's really all about. Like when we sit and we take a look at crafting our vision and the things that we desire, every level of success that we desire to grow into requires a newer version or a different version
Yeah.
of the person who we are now. So how do you keep yourself in always that learning space and having the hunger to learn? So one of the principles that we always talk about if like is lifelong learning. And so one of the things that I realize is that concept is easy to apply to the skills,
Yes.
right? So we could always say, well, I'm always on the quest for more knowledge. I'm going to learn new technology. I'm going to read more books, or, this is, all of the external things which have an internal impact. But how are you challenging yourself to always learn more about you?
Who you be? Who you
Yeah,
be?
and um I'm loving who I am and who I'm growing into, and the person who I'm growing into becoming. And like I said, it's very interesting because I get these glimpses, of who I know, I can be and how I could stand and walk through the world. So why not? Just do the work, accept the challenge and do the work. Now, I'm going to say to our super achievers and our influencers, once again, it's not easy because I too roll around and cry and I have to pity party and I sulk and I pout and I do all of that stuff. But after that's over, right, then what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Right? Are you going to rise to the challenge and do what you need to do? So,
it's interesting because I remember, I have two supervisors. Well, I have a number that come to mind, and one of them, her name was Joy Lepage, and Joy really taught me and provided the safe place for me to be in a consistent state of transformation.
mhm.
And that's where I really kind of was introduced to the concept of excellence versus perfection. And excellence is lifelong learning. Excellence is the joy of becoming. Excellence is the pursuit of ongoing transformation. And I think, those of us who get hungry for it is because we have been exposed to individuals, one, who've modeled it, but two, who've made it safe.
Yeah.
Right. And really, one of the key things for all the super achievers that are listening, one of the key things we can do for our clients, the people we're called to serve, is to create a safe environment for them to put the mask down and go into the process of transformation.
Right.
Because I know when I'm in transformation, I'm feeling extremely vulnerable.
Yeah.
At times I'm feeling extremely lost. And transformation often comes with a letting go of shame,
Mhm.
letting go of the conversation and the judgment that comes with not knowing,
Yeah.
or not showing up the way you want to show up, or not being the person you desire to be, and holding on to the journey of becoming. And in order to do that, it has to occur in a safe space.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. And as you're sharing that, one of the things that I'm reminded of is one of our mentors, Lethea Owens. She always says it all the time. The middle is messy.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times we desire to get to to the end and get to the outcome, but there's a whole lot of mess that we go through on the journey of transformation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the first part of understanding it, is just like knowing that you're really going to go through some stuff, but there's light at the other side if you continue.
Tria, thank you so much. This was such a great conversation, and I think when I want to leave the super achievers with is two things. One is, put in the comment section where you believe you are required to grow. Like, if I were to ask you, who are you in the process of becoming? One is, do you know? And where are you required to grow, expand, and become more? And I think really wanting to leave everybody with is the influencer's journey, in my mind, is a journey of transformation. It is a journey of letting go. It is a journey of becoming more.